So you are again welcome back to class, and this is the fourth module of the Scrum Master training, fourth module, lesson 2. In the last lesson, we discussed about the interrupt buffer. But in this lesson, of course, the interrupt buffer as one of the practices in Scrum, one of the best practices in Scrum. And in this class, lesson 2 of the fourth module, we will now look at what we call yesterday's weather. Yesterday's weather. In previous modules, we've mentioned about this again and again. Yesterday's weather. I'm sure you have some understanding of what yesterday's weather is. So let's jump right into the class. We'll see from the picture here, just as laying the background for the class. We'll see from the picture here, making reference to a sprint that becomes the forecast for the future sprint. This is a sprint, a past sprint, that becomes the forecast for the future sprint. So what then is yesterday's weather? The concept or the practice called yesterday's weather is used to forecast, just as I showed now, to forecast the team's capacity for work in the next sprint based on their performance in previous sprints. The performance of the previous sprint would be or would serve as a forecast for the next sprint. However, please take note that the assumption is that the best predictor of future performance is past performance. I was making an explanation in one of the classes using someone as an individual. Let me relate about that individual again. Let's say that an individual eats about 8 wraps of pounded yam at a sitting on a good day. On a good day, when all things being equal, when such a person is hungry, that individual eats about 8 wraps of pounded yam on a good day when such a person is hungry. So for future forecasts, you could now begin to say this individual has capacity to eat 8 wraps of pounded yam on a good day. That good day is with same condition. That's what that's telling us, right? When external conditions remain consistent. When the external conditions remain consistent. So the external condition in that illustration that I made is when that individual is hungry, he could eat, or the individual, I do not want to use he or she, so it won't sound as if the he eats more than the she. Okay, so the individual eats 8 wraps of pounded yam on a good day. So there would be some days that the individual may not consume as much as that. Let's say, for instance, the individual stopped by somewhere and they've served that individual a bowl of rice before arriving back home. So that proportion of 8 wraps would go down. The person may not consume as much. Or there could be other factors. But what we're saying in essence is that when external conditions remain consistent, we can now use the previous performance as a yardstick to measure future outputs or outcomes, right? We can use previous performance to measure future outcomes. So when calculating yesterday's weather is based on velocity. We know what velocity is. Velocity is the total story points a team was able to complete in previous sprints. So we need to consider the historic velocity, looking at the total story points. And in calculating yesterday's weather, we often make reference to between 3 to 5 sprints, 5 previous sprints, and we find the average of 5 to previous sprints. So perhaps a team did 100 story points in sprint 1 and did 70 story points in sprint 2 and did 130 story points in sprint 3. If we go by that yardstick, the average of those 3 will then be 100, right? So we can say that the team's performance or the team's velocity for story points settles around 100 total story points, sprint in, sprint out. So that is how we have some understanding of how to calculate yesterday's weather. We need to consider the team's capacity. We need to continuously adjust that team's capacity as we go further also, and encourage sustainability while that is being done. So that's essentially what yesterday's weather is. We use previous performances to make judgments or as a yardstick for future forecast. So let's look quickly at some of the considerations for yesterday's weather. Number 1 here is that the team itself needs to be educated about it. The team needs to know what we are making effort to do. Need to have a clear understanding that the yardstick or the measurements of previous performances would be the metrics for future outcomes. Then, of course, you need to ensure that your data is accurate. The accuracy of your previous measurements is important. Data is accurate. You need to find out if the team is estimating closely to the actual. That is, when you check the estimations before the sprint and the actual after the sprint, how close are they? So the quality of your data would go into how reliable your yesterday's weather would be. Then, of course, you need to consider external factors. We've spoken about that. Then, of course, you need to adjust for improvements and anomalies. There will be variables as you go on. For instance, your team member drops at a time, you need to adjust for that. One of your team members went on vacation. One of your team members moved to another team. All those need to be factored into your calculations. Then you need to also integrate with retrospective. Retrospective is very important, where you reflect. We know what the retrospective is in the first place. Then you should also combine this with other estimation techniques. Estimation techniques such as what your team does sprint in, sprint out. How do you estimate? What's your story point measurement? Are you estimating based on points, or you are estimating based on hours, which is time? Then of course you need regular updates and feedback, which would help in your continuous adjustment, and more importantly too is to set realistic expectations. So basically those are the considerations for what yesterday's weather is. It's a short lesson. We have basic understanding earlier, but that is how yesterday's weather is used. Is for the forecast for the future, but we make use of your team's velocity as a yardstick to measure the future. So that will be the end of this class. We will see again in the next class. Or if you have any question, please note them down and send them all across to me. I'll be glad to explain further. Bye for now.